Good morning and welcome to Walking Through the Word. We were in verse 16 yesterday and we're going to continue in verse 16 today and kind of talk about verse 17 and maybe verse 18. But we're going to talk about the law today because John writes and talks about how this logos, this word that became flesh, who's Jesus in verse 17, that talks about the law and then it talks about the grace. And when we look at the law, I think sometimes we think about the law being bad, that the law is bad, and the law is far from it. The law is actually perfect. The law is actually good. Jesus himself said that I have come not to abolish but to fulfill the law, and that's what Jesus came to do. You see, the law gave us the ability towards salvation, towards righteousness. And if you could obey the law, then you would be declared fully righteous and you could then be restored with God. That's if you can obey the law to its full. You can't. Because as even it says in the Old Testament, the problem was is that people took that and they just made it a literal following of the law, forgetting that God said that it's a heart issue as well, that you must follow me with your whole heart, meaning you must obey me with your whole heart. And so we can't fulfill the law, but Jesus can. You see, Jesus actually did every single thing on the law. He followed it, every dot, every tittle, every character, every command, every instruction. Jesus followed every single aspect of it. And so when Jesus is going to die on the cross for us, that is his sacrifice, that because he was able to follow the law for us, he takes our place. This is the only way that this works. So when it says the law was given through Moses, we need to understand that Moses, we talked about Jesus being greater than Moses. Jesus is greater than Moses. Moses was a flawed individual. Moses was a murderer before he, came out to deliver the people of Israel from Egypt. He was a prideful individual at times at the end, which is what eventually cost him his ability to get into the promised land. So Moses was a very flawed individual. He was temperamental at times. The law he introduced reminded the people and showed the people what they were not able to attain. So God's grace now came in Jesus Christ. And the truth of the reality of the law and the fulfillment of the law came through Jesus Christ. It wasn't that the law was voided, it's that the law actually was fulfilled. See, the law is never abolished. It never went away. The obligations of the law are still very much there. The difference is that Jesus took on those obligations. And so for us, we can't follow the law, but if we follow Jesus, we then have followed the law. Make sense? Kind of, sort of. So when it talks about here that we received grace upon grace, in other words, we received the fullness of God's grace, the culmination of God's grace, and it came through the law and through Jesus fulfilling the law. This grace could only come through Jesus. This truth could only come through Jesus. Now, when we look at verse 18 here, there's been people, and I've seen people say, well, the Bible's full of contradictions, and they're like, well, what's a contradiction? And they'll say, I've actually heard people use this verse, oh, well, it says no one has ever seen God, and yet we see God in Jesus. So what does this mean? Well, that's a great question. If you recall back into the Old Testament, you'll see that there are times when God does appear before people like Abraham and such, but it's God's messengers that come. Other theologians have argued that there are instances when it's actually Jesus pre-crucifixion that appears before, but pre-incarnation that appears before Abraham and such. We don't really know, but we know that when people like Moses asked God, I want to see your face, God says you can't survive. It's not that I wouldn't want to show you my face, it's that you couldn't survive the holiness of this. And so you catch glimpses of it. You catch glimpses of it in the whisper of the wind. Or you catch the back of God's head as he says to Moses, I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock and I'm going to shield you so then you can see the back of my head as I go. And of course, Moses was completely blown away in awe and sunder. So when we see Jesus, Jesus says very clearly, if you've seen me, you have seen the Father. In other words, everything that I am, everything that I do reflects God. Everything, every miracle, every truth that I share, my crucifixion on the cross shows you God. It shows you the essence of God. It shows you the character of God. It shows you the qualities of God. And it shows you the face of the Son of God. So this is what John is saying here, that God is not some mysterious God, but now he has made himself known in Jesus Christ. That God has revealed any mysteries that there may have been that we still didn't quite understand that should have been knowable, we get them revealed through Jesus Christ. And so this prologue here this preface, I guess, not prologue, prologue's the end, this preface that John gave is really setting the stage for why and who Jesus is. And we're now going to dive into it starting in verse 19 with more conversation about the witness. But for now, I want you to continue to think about the grace that Jesus gave, how he was able to fulfill the law, and how our gratefulness should be reflected in that reality of him doing what we could not do ourselves. All right, have a blessed day.